PR stations. Other contributors include Lilly Endowment, a private foundation supporting NPR's coverage of religion and spirituality, and Jarl and Pamela Mohn, focusing on civil liberties, foster youth, public radio, and the arts.
This is Charlotte Talks. I'm Mike Collins. On the local news roundup, a raucous Senate hearing. North Carolina's Thom Tillis pushes Attorney General Pam Bondi on the intended outcome of sending National Guard troops into American cities and adds this.
I reject any notion that Charlotte's on that list.
In less than a month, voters will decide on the 1-cent sales tax for transit. But this week, Charlotte City Council's Transportation Committee votes against what will be a key component of that plan. The federal government shutdown continues with little widespread effect on the city of Charlotte yet, though Mecklenburg County Manager Mike Bryant will start to worry if it goes beyond 30 or 40 days.
That's when we'll have to have some internal discussions and have a different conversation.
Plus, Tepper Sports and Entertainment may be getting back into the construction business, this time for an entertainment venue. Here to talk about those stories and more is WFAE politics reporter Steve Harrison. He's here along with Ryan Pitkin, co-founder and editor of Queen City Nerve, and Erik Spanberg, managing editor of the Charlotte Business Journal. Good morning, everybody. Thanks for being here.
Morning.
Good morning.
So the November election is less than a month away. Early voting begins on Thursday of next week, and on that ballot will be a referendum for a 1-cent sales tax to support Charlotte's transit plan. And that is why a city council committee's decision this week caught our attention. That decision might have flown under the radar had it happened months ago, but again, voting starts next week, and the Charlotte City Council Transportation and Planning Committee voted against recommending to the full council a key provision of the plan should the voters say yes to the referendum. So, Steve, what exactly did the committee vote 3-2 against?
Yeah, the vote was about the council's process for naming its appointments to the new Transit Authority Board, like you said, should the voters approve that. And the mayor had appointed a working group of 3 council members, Ed Driggs, LaWanna Mayfield, and James Mitchell, to kind of go through and vet, interview roughly 80 people who've applied. And the idea was that they would create a short list, help guide the full council. But the committee just didn't feel comfortable with that. You know, they felt like that was too much of a filter. And as you said, they voted no. It's very, very unusual for something to lose. Everything always passes. And then, that was unusual. And then the council discussed it again later Monday night.
So for people who have not studied the transportation plan, like perhaps you have, Steve, and you, Erik, and you, Ryan, part of this plan is the creation of a new transportation board, a regional board, to replace the current Metropolitan Transit Commission. I think that's what they're called now. Members are going to be chosen by the various towns surrounding Charlotte. Each chooses one member, the governor, the state Senate president pro tem, and the Speaker of the House. For whatever reason, they each get one appointment each. And the city of Charlotte gets 12 members. And how is that supposed to be broken down? How do these 12 members... I mean, the mayor gets 2, right? Who else gets to choose these members?
Yes. What you also have the Charlotte Regional Business Alliance, I believe, has 3 selections within the city. So that's 4 of the 12 right there. Another one of the members is supposed to have had experience with running a small business or owning a small business. So you can see how there are exceptions sort of throughout this, and that carries on with the county and some of the other appointees that you mentioned.
And city council members get to pick 7 of these people. Charlotte City Council's Malcolm Graham mentioned that he has been saying for a year and a half that this process has really been an Achilles heel. So if he's been saying it for a year and a half, why are we a week away from voting starting and they're just now getting around to saying, isn't that a good idea?
Well, I think that some of this comes down to, remember, you have the negotiation with all of the towns and the city and county manager to build enough consensus to get something to Raleigh and the state legislature, and then they approve it. And at each iteration, there are compromises involved. And I think what we're seeing now is that this is really a fairly rushed process because you're trying to put together a 27-member transit authority board. Remember, Mike, they want to have this group in place by December, and then the legislation requires that the new board, file 6 different reports on various aspects of governance and how this thing will work. So that's a lot to do in just a couple of months, while, oh, by the way, you also have an election on the tax that would fund all this.
So the committee voted no, but the council talked about it this week anyway. As you've said, Steve, Vi Lyles chose council members James Mitchell, Ed Driggs, and Lawana Mayfield to interview applicants for these positions on this body and create a list of finalists among the 70 people who have applied so far. But at that full council meeting this week, some members, like Renee Johnson, had some misgivings. She believes the appointment of these 3 people to choose these finalists gives them too much power.
It's more of the same, and people are tired. So I won't be supporting this process. Again, I don't think that we've listened to the community enough, even for the tax.
So did she offer an alternative to the method they're now using?
Not specifically. I think the main thing, again, is she and some others worry that, this kind of small committee will call the list and they won't really get full input, that it'll all already be decided. I talked to Councilmember Johnson yesterday, and then she also came out and said she is against the tax. She will be voting no. And it's also interesting,
Why?
Councilmember, she feels like her take was that she feels like the proponents of the tax kind of keep saying, well, it isn't perfect, but we need to do this anyway, once in a generation opportunity. And her quote to me was, where would that be acceptable anywhere else? Would you hand in a project to your boss and say, well, it's not perfect, but here we go. So again, it's important. The majority of the city council still supports this. The vast majority of elected officials still support this, but there's been some softening of support in Charlotte. Councilmember Mayfield, who's on that committee, she came out against it on Tuesday morning. Tijuana Brown is a no. So some people are getting some cold feet as we get closer.
There's actually an old saying, close enough for government work, which applies here, one would guess. Another point of discussion surrounded City Council's Marjorie Molina's decision to apply to be a member of this transportation board. She can only do so because she's going to cycle off council in December because she lost her reelection bid. Councilmember Tijuana Brown called that a red flag. Why?
I think it's just a sort of a perception of a conflict of interest. People who, it also has to do with the fact of what we've been discussing for the beginning of the show, which is that nobody really knows how this is going to work. One of the discussions around Molina and her willingness to join as a volunteer then turned into a discussion with the city attorney as to, is it going to be volunteer or is it going to be paid? And the attorney said, there's a chance that nothing here says it has to be volunteer. There's a chance that the board gets put into place and then decides that they're going to pay themselves some sort of compensation. So it's all just about what is the perception, because like you said, she won't have any power as an elected official by the time this even comes to fruition, if it does.
Erik.
Mike, another little wrinkle from this Transit Authority Board process. So you mentioned that the Speaker and the Senate President can each appoint a member. They appointed Ned Curran and David Longo, who's the chair of the Charlotte Alliance Board. Ned Curran has been highly involved in this entire process and was a former state transportation board chair. I mentioned that because, so that's 2 people affiliated with the Charlotte Regional Business Alliance. Then the Business Alliance has 3 more picks within the city's 12, and from people like Action NC and others who oppose this are saying, well, wait a minute, the fix is in. You can see that the business community, among others, already has too much influence. And why do you have 2 members already appointed and taking on committee work when the tax hasn't even passed? So that's just an interesting subplot as all this plays out.
And refresh my memory on this, Steve. It wasn't one of the complaints about the makeup of the current board, which will be replaced by this new board, the fact that Charlotte holds too much sway. They have too much power, according to cities like towns like Matthews and Pineville and Huntersville and Davidson. This seems to be doing exactly the same thing that the old board did in terms of its weight.
So yes and no. The Metropolitan Transit Commission, which will expire if this passes, on that, Charlotte only had one vote, the same as Cornelius and Huntersville, et cetera. So in a way, the new authority gives Charlotte more power than the MTC. However, the big key here is that CATS was a city department. And so if push came to shove, Charlotte did whatever they wanted to do. I mean, and we saw that a couple of years ago with this audit over the light rail derailment and stuff. The MTC kind of did their thing, and Charlotte said, "Oh, thanks. We're happy to listen to that, but we're not really going to do what you say."
So current city council member Marjorie Molina has thrown her hat in the ring. She'd like to be a member of this new transportation committee, and she says that she's doing so simply because she wants to serve, and stressed that this would be a volunteer position. But perhaps that is not exactly accurate, because possible compensation came out in an answer to a question posed by council member Dimple Ajmera to interim city attorney Anthony Fox.
Does it say anything about the authority's board and possible compensation, or does it strictly say it's a volunteer role?
It doesn't say volunteer, and it gives the authority I believe the ability at some point to set compensation if they choose to.
So was this new information to council members? I mean, I know we're coming down to the wire here, and why is this such a rushed process? They seem to be voting in the dark. Are they?
Well, as I mentioned, and Ryan mentioned earlier, that the piece about it could be paid. It's not paid right now. I spoke to Ned Curran, who again was appointed, and I asked him that question, and he said, "Oh, this is strictly a volunteer position." But this seems to be new information. I didn't know it. Go ahead.
Yeah, because let me repeat the answer that Anthony Fox gave to Dimple a moment ago about compensation and how it's handled in this transportation bill.
Gives the authority I believe the ability at some point to set compensation if they choose to.
He said, "I believe." Was that just a turn of phrase, or does he not definitively know?
I don't know the answer to that. Steve, do you
Yeah,
know?
I think it was just that it's silent, that the bill doesn't say you cannot. And so I think that the interim attorney was just kind of hedging his bets a little bit. But I think one thing worth noting that when this, or if this authority gets up and running, the people, I predict the people in charge, the director of the authority, the attorney for the authority, et cetera, will be making very, very high salaries. Transit authorities across the country, the leaders of those make big, big salaries. And so you're going to have a situation where, the board will argue, well, to get the best people, we must pay market rate. I would assume, I wouldn't be surprised if the leader of the authority makes more than the Charlotte city manager, makes more than the Mecklenburg County manager. That's just the going rate across the country.
So we're talking about something close to $500,000. Did the council ultimately reach a decision on this discussion about how this board should be comprised and who should serve on it?
They're going to continue to kick the can. They're going to come back to it at the next meeting and discuss it further.
So what does it say that the full council tabled this discussion until the next meeting and the voting starts Thursday?
A lot of people in a hurry. A lot of people in a hurry.
Everything.
More people are signing up. We're at 100 now that have signed up or have applied for these positions.
Okay, we have to take a break. When we come back, we'll talk about the fact that we've hired a new city attorney to replace the interim city attorney whose voice you just heard. It's Charlotte Talks on WFAE.
Monday on Charlotte Talks, early voting starts Thursday in Charlotte's municipal elections. The only competitive race on City Council is in District 6, formerly represented by Tariq Bakari. Now his wife Krista is running as a Republican against Democrat Kimberly Owens, who has been in Charlotte for over 30 years, but this is her first time running for office. We sit down for a conversation about why she wants the job Monday at 9 on 90.7 WFAE.
The government shutdown moves into week 2. Next time on the Friday News Roundup, is there any sign of movement toward a budget deal? Also, the latest from Chicago as Texas National Guard troops arrive in that city. James Comey faces arraignment and big feelings over Bad Bunny. That's next time on 1A.
You can catch 1A this morning at 10 on WFAE.
Are you tired of sifting through countless news articles and sponsored posts to find the stories that matter about Charlotte? Well, we've got a solution for you. Newsworthy, the daily news podcast from WFAE. We share the top stories every morning, saving you time and keeping you informed. Subscribe to Newsworthy, available now everywhere you get your podcasts.
It's Charlotte Talks on listener-funded 90.7 WFAE and WFHE. I'm Mike Collins. Steve Harrison's with us, our WFAE politics reporter. Ryan Pitkin, co-founder and editor of the Queen City Nerve publication, and Erik Spanberg is managing editor of the Charlotte Business Journal. So we've been talking about city council, and we heard from Anthony Fox, the interim city attorney, a moment ago, but we have now picked his replacement. A full-time new city attorney was named this week. But before we talk about that person, Steve, let's talk about how we got here, because I know that you and at least WFAE played a role in the fact that we have an interim city attorney. Talk about how we got here.
Yeah, if we go back, let's see, to I'm trying to get my dates correct. At the end of 2024, the mayor and city council became dissatisfied with the city attorney then, Patrick Baker. They were not pleased with his performance. There was some tension between the city attorney's office and the economic development office over deals with the Charlotte Hornets, where the economic development office felt the city attorney's office was meddling, getting too involved. There was some tension over Patrick Baker's decision to release public records to WFAE about the transit plan. Some people in the city did not want that released. There was a lot of tension. And so the council voted at the end of...
But to be clear, that information was public information. And
Absolutely,
it was ultimately
yes.
released under the Public Information Act, correct?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it was one of the council members in closed session, asked him why he leaked it. And of course, it was not a leak. And so the council voted to terminate Baker's employment, and then the mayor pushed to bring in Anthony Fox from Parker Poe as the interim attorney. Fox had some municipal experience, but most of his work had been in the private sector. And it was interesting, over this past year in 2025, Anthony Fox kind of took a different view of the city's, had a different interpretation of open records law and open meetings law. And we saw that in some of these controversies about the settlement with the $305,000 settlement with Police Chief Johnny Jennings. He took a more private sector view of the city's responsibility.
Erik.
And Steve was recounting what happened with former city attorney Patrick Baker. Remember, too, that while council took that action in a closed meeting, the city never said he had retired, been fired, whatever the circumstance was. We didn't know. He wasn't at the meetings. He did end up being paid, I think, $230,000, and his tenure ended at the end of 2024. But this whole process, everything we just spoke about, and I think what you're about to ask about, Mike, is sort of shrouded in issues and challenges with public transparency and what needs to be shared and when. And I will add, just to close this part, that the state auditor did do an investigation into the settlement with the police chief that was presided over by the interim city attorney and found some deficiencies. So we've had all kinds of things swirling around the city attorney's office here for months.
Yes, we're going to talk about the money. To the best of my knowledge, we have never been told the real reason, and perhaps we never will be told the reason why Patrick Baker, the former city attorney, was released, shall we say. I don't know that they've ever said he was fired. They simply didn't pursue a renewal of his employment agreement. But his last day was December 31st of last year. On June 10th of this year, City Council voted to extend the contract of the interim city attorney, Anthony Fox, through the end of this year and voted to give him a $75,000 bonus. He was being paid, I understand, correct me if I'm wrong, about $300,000 for the year. And he'd only been on the job for 6 months when they voted to give him that $75,000 bonus. Why the bonus?
One of the things, Mike, that was interesting is back in the spring of 2025, the city was moving forward or was planning to move forward with interviewing candidates for the new permanent city attorney position. Mayor Vi Lyles called that off in the spring, and the interviews stopped. And then we got to June, and well, we didn't have anyone for the job. And so then, with no one else to fill the job, the mayor and the city put forth this contract extension for Anthony Fox, the interim attorney, and the city was left with it was again kind of this classic situation of like, well, we've got to do it. We've run out of time. There's no other choice. It's now or never, that we see over and over again. And that's where that $75,000 bonus came from, and other bonuses that I think we'll talk about momentarily.
So that, as I understand it, that decision raised some eyebrows on the parts of some members of council, because Anthony Fox was the attorney who dealt with CMPD Chief Johnny Jennings, who threatened to sue the city over text messages sent to him by former city council member Tarek Bakari, which resulted in a $300,000+ settlement with the chief, which also included a retention bonus, though the chief is about to leave. So why they paid him a retention bonus is a mystery to us all. The $75,000 retention bonus that was said to be paid to Fox, our interim attorney, another $75,000 retention bonus, if he worked beyond October 31st of this year. The new attorney that we've just hired begins on November the 3rd. So the $75,000 retention bonus would have paid him through October 31st. There are 2 days between October 31st and November 3rd, and they are a Saturday and a Sunday, for which Anthony Fox will be paid $56,150.04 for the entire month of November and December, because he is working beyond October 31st. Is that correct?
That is, I mean, the Charlotte Observer had a very good story on it this week, and that laid out the timeline. And my memory from the original deal is that that's correct. That once he worked if he worked any part of November and December, he got the full last 2 months of his pay for 2025.
Okay, so I suppose something could happen on a Saturday or a Sunday that would require the services of a city attorney, but seems unlikely to me. Why wouldn't they just go without an attorney for 2 days on a weekend?
Well, you could have also you didn't have to go without attorney. You could have just promoted someone from inside the office to be
40
a new
people in
interim,
the city attorney's office.
to be a new city attorney. But again, this was back in June. I mean, this was clearly how it was going to be played out, that they were going to put someone in early November. And
all right, so
here we go.
Sometimes city council likes to blame city staff for not keeping them informed on certain things, but this is entirely in the laps of Charlotte City Council, because there are, I think, 2 or 3 positions that are hired and fired directly by Charlotte City Council. This is one of those positions that they hire and fire directly. Can they do math? Are they adding up all this extra money that they're spending? This seems profligate to me.
I think obviously they can do math because they put a budget together, I guess, but I understand what the point of the question is, like why all these bonuses. And we really haven't gotten a clear answer other than what Steve is hitting on, which those of us who follow council on a regular basis see again and again. And that is this propensity to do everything at the last minute, and then things get rushed, and then there's a panic, and then, oh my gosh, what if we lose this or we lose that? Here's the only way we can fix it. And it's a pattern that we see again and again.
So, who is this new city attorney who will begin on November the 3rd after we paid $56,000 for a weekend? Who is this new city attorney? Where does she come from? And what is her compensatory arrangement?
Andrea Leslie Fight is the new attorney, and she currently is the county attorney in Guilford County, which is Greensboro. She had worked in the Charlotte City Attorney's office under the previous attorneys, Bob Hageman and Patrick Baker. So she has some experience here. The vote, I believe, to hire her was unanimous. That's worth noting because a lot of these decisions, Mike, that we've been talking about were not unanimous. There were people on council who were very concerned and upset with how things were playing out. And I think the big thing to watch will be that she comes entirely from the municipal background. And it will be interesting to see if she takes a more traditional role, or not role, but viewpoint in how the city responds to public records and transparency that had really changed in 2025.
So are you saying that it's likely to become more transparent under her leadership?
I can't say for sure, but I just think someone who's come from the purely municipal background is going to, I think, come from this viewpoint of reading the state statutes in a traditional way, like the previous city attorney Patrick Baker did, like his predecessor Bob Hageman, like Bob Hageman's predecessor Mac McCarley. There was a certain way in Charlotte, which I think we can all attest to, that under those attorneys, when you asked for information, we would generally get it in a certain timeline. And then things really started to change, and it'll be interesting to see if we kind of go back to that more traditional, a little more transparent interpretation.
Are things becoming less transparent because of the things we just talked about, all this extra money flying around, and they kind of know in their heart of hearts this is screwed up?
I don't know. I mean, certainly, I know they don't. No one would be eager. They never want to share money, extra spending, things like that. But I think, to Steve's point, it's a protocol and an experience where if you come up through municipal law, you're used to the idea of releasing information, that you're going to have to release information. And we've seen this in other departments with the city too. When you come in from the private sector, there is much more reluctance and almost a little bit of, hey, I'm working on something right now. Why should I have to give this to you right now until it's finished, until it's resolved? This is something that should be confidential. And as I say, we've seen that in various departments when people come in from the private sector.
Okay, so we'll see what happens in the coming months. Do we know what she's being paid? I asked that question. I don't think I got an answer to it. We don't know what she's being paid.
If you file a FOIA to find out, you might get her fired. So just be careful.
Okay. The federalizing of National Guard troops and sending them into American cities, allegedly to protect federal buildings, but also to act as deterrents to crime, is raising concerns over the motivations of these activities and exactly where all of this is headed. There's a lot of stuff going on right now between the courts and National Guard troops from Texas going into Chicago, and the governor of Oklahoma now saying that the governor of Texas shouldn't have sent his National Guard troops to Chicago because the governor of Illinois doesn't want them there. But this week, at a raucous Senate hearing with Attorney General Pam Bondi, North Carolina Republican Senator Thom Tillis offered his support for what's been happening in Washington, L.A., and Chicago.
I believe the president is absolutely focused on making these dangerous cities safer. I reject any notion that Charlotte's on that list, by the way. So whether you're Democrat or Republican, bring it on.
So was Charlotte ever rumored to be on that list?
Well, we had the visit by Vice President J.D. Vance, who offered to send in troops. We had the request from the Fraternal Order of Police telling city leaders that they should request National Guard help. And we had, of course, the Transportation Secretary saying that perhaps transit funding should be stripped because of Charlotte's public safety problems. So I would say all of those things pointed in that direction, yes.
So what does bring it on mean? That's what Thom Tillis.
I thought that was
said.
interesting. You know, he was saying, at least this is how I interpret it. He was saying, while those other cities, some of those other cities need the help from the National Guard, Charlotte does not. That's what he was saying. And he said something to the effect of Democrats or Republicans, bring it on. That's really interesting, given the list of people I just mentioned to you on the Republican side who have intimated that maybe Charlotte does need federal intervention with public safety.
So Thom Tillis said what we just heard him say, but he also expressed some misgivings about all of this, sort of.
I was formerly Speaker of the House in North Carolina. If I thought I had to have the president deploy troops to keep North Carolina safe, I would have considered myself a failure as a state leader. And so I just hope we strike the balance so that we're not fixing a problem temporarily, only to come back maybe even worse than the problem we're fixing.
That is not a concern that I've heard raised by anybody else, that even if this incursion of troops into American cities does reduce crime in the short term, that what happens when they leave ought to be a concern that we think about. And that brings us to another concern, that the administration does not mean for them to leave. That is the leading edge of something new in this conversation. But Tillis said that if he were the Speaker of the House, had federal troops been called in to fix a problem in North Carolina, he would have considered himself to be a failure. Isn't that what Donald Trump has called the Democratic leadership in these cities and states? Failed?
Yeah,
absolutely.
Go ahead, Ryan.
Yeah. No, yeah, that sort of is the messaging, and that's at least preliminarily what he's trying to get across. There's obviously questions about on the longer term, as you just mentioned, Mike, what is happening when cities are pretty much occupied, and that's something that Bondi and Tillis just went back and forth about a little bit about. Why are they there? Are they there as an additional police force? Are they there as a collaborative police force? Or are they just there to protect federal property? And that's a major difference between the two. Bondi claimed that they would just be there to protect federal property in these protest situations, but we've already seen that that's not really been the case.
And clearly they've been encouraged to be aggressive in their treatment of peaceful protesters, which is becoming pretty damned alarming, actually. Erik?
I just thought this whole thing with Senator Tillis was really interesting because remember, we started the conversation with, he says, hey, Charlotte does not need help. Charlotte knows what it's doing. Then at the same time, as you say, he presents this argument of, well, it's not that you're wrong to send in federal troops. It's that it's not a best practice and that, what will happen after the troops leave. I mean, I almost wondered, was he playing some sort of, kind of manipulation game there of, I'm not going to tell you that it's a bad policy. What I'm going to say is that it's risky. And oh, by the way, I very much believe that President Trump has the nation's best interest at heart. It was really an artful political statement there going in a lot of directions.
And artful is a good word for it. And the question is why? Because he's not going to run again. So he could go up against fearless leader, one would think. His concern, as he expressed it, was that Trump is term limited and that when he leaves office, local leaders won't be held accountable because the federal government will have unintentionally given a free pass to state, county, and local leaders. But is that the real concern here, or is it the concern expressed this morning by the Oklahoma governor that this is all an infringement on states' rights?
I think it depends who you ask, Mike, which you're going to hate that answer.
Yeah,
okay.
The latter should be the concern. He went a long way around to do it.
We will move on to crime in Charlotte, since we're talking about it already, to a degree, when we come back.
Coming up in 20 minutes, President Trump threatened to invoke the Insurrection Act this week as he continues to clash with local governments. Meanwhile, the government shutdown rolls on. We hear the latest, and former FBI Director James Comey was arraigned this week. Those stories and more on the 1A News Roundup at 10.
Here's an easy way to make your support for WFAE go even further. Many companies offer matching support for their employees' donations, which means your gift could have double the impact. It's a simple way to boost your support for the news you love and make a bigger difference. Check if your company offers matching gifts when you give today at WFAE.org/support.
Support comes from Mazda of South Charlotte, committed to bridging the gap between adventure and adventurer by helping people select vehicles that fit one's lifestyle. More at mazdaofsouthcharlotte.com. And by the Catawba Lands Conservancy, protecting land, clean water, wildlife, and farms through a new data-driven conservation strategic plan. More at catawbalands.org/conservation plan. Support also comes from listeners like you.
It's Charlotte Talks on WFAE and WFAE.org. I'm Mike Collins. It's the local news roundup with Steve Harrison, our politics reporter here at WFAE News. Erik Spanberg is managing editor of the Charlotte Business Journal, and Ryan Pitkin is co-founder and editor of Queen City Nerve. We were talking about crime and sending federal troops into certain cities with Thom Tillis, his comments about that. But the possibility of troops being sent into Charlotte came up in the aftermath of the stabbing death of Irina Zarutska in August on a Lynx train. There were already concerns about safety on transit and safety uptown. And last week, as we've already alluded to, the Fraternal Order of Police in Mecklenburg sent a letter to Charlotte leaders putting them on notice that they intend to request federal law enforcement assistance in Charlotte. And this week, CMPD launched 2 initiatives in response to public perceptions of the city being dangerous. Ryan, was this in response to all of what we just talked about, or was this already in progress?
It was already in progress. I believe it was launched in July. A task force, public safety task force by Charlotte Center City Partners, that was made to look at some of there was already some bad high-profile incidents that had happened in Uptown, including a mass shooting into a crowd of folks outside of a bar in Uptown overnight, one night. So this is what sort of got that ball rolling, and obviously it took on more urgency in the wake of Irina Zarutska's killing and all of these other, what came after that.
So there are 2 initiatives that have been launched. One is called CROWN, an acronym for Center City's Restoration of Order, Wellness, and Nonviolence. That this will focus on what CMPD is calling quality of life crimes. What does that mean?
It's sort of going to be a crackdown on panhandling, illegal street vending, things that they called public disruption crimes, which can be very broad. It's something that Ed Drake's talked about at a recent city council meeting, where he's sort of weighing the risks and the rewards of becoming more tough on, things that people usually will walk by and turn the other cheek to. And now it sort of sounds like a crackdown, which can have all sorts of different results. Disorder will not be tolerated was a specific quote. I hope I didn't just steal a cut that you're planning to play, but no. It does sound like they're going to be using a heavier hand in Uptown in the coming months.
Steve.
Yeah, I think what Ryan said is really interesting, because in a way you could say, well, this doesn't sound like much. We're going to be focusing on quality of life issues, and is that really a problem? And that's debatable. But it is a reversal from really the last 10 years of kind of law enforcement policy in Charlotte, which is to police with a much lighter hand than in the past. I mean, the number of arrests have dropped by half over the last 10 years. And council's directive has been, hey, let's not worry about the little stuff. Let's worry about the big stuff. And now we're kind of going back to where we were.
So Charlotte and other cities, including New York City, have had this pendulum swing from get tough on crime to let's ease off a bit to back to get tough on crime. We have enough of a track record now to know which seems to have the better payoff. Do we know?
Well, I think I don't know. I think you can present data to go both ways on that. Broken windows policing, tough on crime policing. There's all sorts of different strategies and people presenting different data. There was Michael Smith with Center City Partners at this press conference Wednesday said he believes due to COVID is the reason that people I forget the exact quote.
Let me read you the quote. I've got the quote.
Okay.
He says that during COVID, this is Michael Smith, who's the CEO of Charlotte Center City Partners, which promotes Uptown and South End. He says, during COVID, the world needed grace, and we offered it. In doing so, I'm concerned that our community has inadvertently relaxed our standards for public safety. We're seeking to return to the standards that help define quality of life for residents and guests. what does he mean by we relaxed our standards? What standards did we relax?
I think he's talking about those nuisance crimes, the broken window theory that Ryan just mentioned. And I think another thing another thing is that he is hearing, and many other people in Uptown in particular are hearing from businesses, is people have this perception that it's not safe, that they might get hassled, that there are annoyances and perhaps bigger dangers, and that is, I think, behind at least some of this.
So the Charlotte Center City Partners has launched an image campaign to tell people that it's safe uptown. But as you say, perception is reality. So will these police initiatives, which also include a crackdown to address trends about violent crime near bars and nightlife spots, do you think that this will help ease people's minds?
If it's sustained, it will help ease people's minds. I do think that when you have police, and we've talked about this with in the aftermath of Arenas of Roots, because murder and transit, when you have the physical presence of police, that does make a difference. Clearly, it can't stop everything, but it does deter people. And I think the other thing, Mike, that the press conference that that Ryan is referring to, what was interesting is you saw the mayor, you saw the district attorney, you saw the business community and Center City Partners. You saw a strong turnout, and that was just 4 or 5 days after we had the media event at the Sugar Creek station with the new vehicles for the transit enforced public safety effort. And you might say, well, this is just public relations. But remember, this is a group of people who had not been quick to make a public stand or to be visible. Now you do sense some urgency on their part to not only start and continue these initiatives, but to make it clear to the public that they're doing these things.
So back to City Council for a moment. This week, the Council's Jobs and Economic Development Committee voted to move ahead with funding for redevelopment of the Excelsior Club. Ryan, for newcomers, what was the Excelsior Club?
So the Excelsior Club is sort of a gem of the historic West End. It was a black nightclub that opened in the 1940s, obviously during the Jim Crow era, and it served as sort of a hub for that community. It is sort of the history of the historic West End alongside obviously Johnson C. Smith. But it is a major, or was a major point of pride for that community. It hosted every act from Nat King Cole to James Brown and everybody in between. It became a political hub for the black community along the West End. And
it closed in 2016 and has since fallen into disrepair. And there have been several attempts to restore and reopen this club over the years. And Malcolm Graham, who represents the district that is home to the club, believes its revitalization could lead to something bigger.
This is a part of what I believe is core to revitalization. We're not investing in a club. We're investing in a corridor, protecting history, legacy, and tradition.
And Sean Kennedy, the developer working on this project, obviously agrees.
I think when Excelsior opens back up, it's going to bring people back to this corridor and start a catalyst or revitalization of Beatty'sford Road.
So other developers have raised hopes of bringing the Excelsior Club back to life, but those efforts never unfolded. What is the secret sauce this time?
Well, there's been a lot of back and forth over whether the original building needs to be raised or not. There was originally going to be a sort of a boutique hotel built there that turns the original building into a museum of sorts, a mini museum, and that didn't work out because I think a lot of land use folks have agreed that building has to go. And this plan here is planning to knock it down, but rebuild something in its place that looks like it, that pays homage to it, that is named Excelsior, and has a number of similar uses. They want to bring back the juke joint feel, I think was used in the meeting, but also make it a community hub for anything from farmers markets to food options, things like that.
So how much money is the city being asked for to kick in? There must be some dollar figure that
the city is being asked for $1.5 million towards the project, which will be $8.3 million total.
Okay, and this is going to be voted on by council when?
October 27th, last meeting of the month.
Okay. So we're running out of time, but I have a lot of stuff to cover. So very quickly, we are 10 days, I think, this morning into the latest federal government shutdown. The shutdown is not just impacting federal workers in D.C. and around the country. It also has a potential of impacting federal programs that impact individual citizens around the country. The city of Charlotte is keeping an eye on housing vouchers, which could be impacted by the budget impasse, but not quite yet.
Federal funding is always uncertain, but we are in what I like to call right now an undeniably uncertain time.
That's Rebecca Hefner, the Director of Housing and Neighborhood Services for the City of Charlotte. These vouchers are for so-called Section 8 housing, which Hefner says appear to be safe in the short term.
The concern would only be if that shutdown lasted beyond 60 days, which is unprecedented, but also not something we can predict.
The city is also said to be considering $20 million worth of housing development subsidies requested by developers from the city's Housing Trust Fund. Is that connected to this shutdown, or is this altogether separate?
That one's separate. Housing Trust Fund is already in the coffers.
Meanwhile, SNAP and WIC benefits for October allegedly are safe because those payments were issued in mid-September prior to the shutdown, but November is uncertain, and something comes due, I think, next week with regard to this. When it comes to other services administered by Mecklenburg County, impacts to those services thus far have been minor. They're funded through the next couple of months, but there could be delays for some benefits, and here's how Mike Bryant, Mecklenburg County's manager, put it to County Commission.
So if history repeats itself and we don't have another budget within the next 30 or 40 days, we should be okay. But if it goes beyond that, that's when we'll have to have some internal discussions and come back to you and have a different conversation.
But we don't know what we don't know, and things could change.
Today, we feel like we're going to be okay. If it goes well beyond 60 or 90 days, we'll have to have a different conversation. So receive this today as information only. Not a concern that we're going to have any layoffs, any cuts, or anything like that. We're not at that place today.
So, getting back to the Women's, Infants, and Children, or WIC program, that program evidently runs out of funding in a week. Is the county in a position to step in and take up the slack?
I don't believe so.
Right.
Yeah, go ahead, Eric.
No, I was going to go along the same track. It doesn't, at least so far, it doesn't sound like it. As you mentioned, I think you mentioned, Mike, 26,000 low-income women and children would be affected next week if that, unless something happens. So at least so far, we have not heard of a rescue fund.
Okay. And you wanted to say something, I believe, Eric, because you had your hand up all during Mike Bryant's comments.
Yes, I was going to mention that, actually, and then I was just going to let you know that I thought you were channeling Donald Rumsfeld, so it wasn't important. We don't know what we don't know. Yeah. For older political listeners, they can... Yeah.
Look it up. Google it. North Carolina State Representative Cecil Brockman, he's a Democrat from Guilford County, was arrested on Wednesday on charges of taking indecent liberties with a child and with statutory rape. These are serious charges. Has he been arraigned yet?
No, I believe there was a medical emergency on Thursday. He is supposed to appear today, this afternoon at 2 o'clock was the last that I saw. And so then things would start to move forward from there.
A lot of people have come forward and saying he should resign. It's almost universal, and it's growing by the minute. He's a six-term legislator and a Democrat who has broken with the Democratic Party on several occasions, legislatively speaking, siding with Republicans. And it looked as though he might be crossing the aisle much along the lines of Tricia Cotham at some point in time. State Democratic Chair Anderson Clayton has called for him to resign immediately because of the, quote, profound seriousness of these criminal charges. Has he said anything about this? Because in America, you are innocent until proven guilty.
I have not seen him quoted anywhere. We should also mention, Mike, that the Republican Speaker, Destin Hall, has called for his resignation, as has the Minority Leader Robert Reeves, and Attorney General Jeff Jackson. So you're hearing from a lot of people, a lot of Democrats, but also some very important Republicans, that he needs to step down right now.
Okay. Finally, this morning, Tepper Sports and Entertainment has announced plans to build an indoor music and events center next to Bank of America Stadium. What can you tell us, Steve, about this proposed facility?
This is as I understand it, 4,400 seats indoor venue right next to the stadium. And I think the argument from Tepper Sports is that it's going to fill a kind of a unneeded, or well, not unneeded, excuse me, I misspoke, with a size that we don't have. Like, we don't have a venue of this size. And so,
hopefully it's needed.
Yes, I know Erik I think Erik and Ryan have covered this more, but I think one of the other headlines is that, as far as I know, no request for public money.
That's the interesting part about this. It's going to be funded allegedly entirely by Tepper Sports and will require no taxpayer money, but it will require an adjustment to the ground lease between the city and Tepper Sports, something that is scheduled to be taken up at next week's city council meeting. But it sounds like Republican council member Ed Driggs likes the idea, and he says that David Tepper has already shown he can bring big events to the area.
Savannah Banana, Beyonce, the charity for Helene, very exciting events, big events for the hospitality industry.
So as Steve said, this venue will seat around 4,400 people, which is a size that fills a gap, according to what Deputy City Manager Sean Heath told WSOC-TV.
What you see is a lot of venues that are kind of in that 200 to 2,000 range. And then you see a real void in that 2,500 to 8,500 range.
So this is supposed to break ground in 2027, open by 2030. Is there any question about the ground lease deal being changed to accommodate this? No. Okay. So is this a done deal, or, I hate to say this, might this go the way of some other projects proposed and later abandoned by Tepper?
Oh, no.
Tepper
has claimed in the past to have brought live music to Charlotte, quote, because he started hosting 4 to 5 concerts at Bank of America Stadium. So once this place starts hosting 80 to 100 shows a year, he's going to be insufferable, but it might be worth it.
Don't get Charlotte squawks.
We know that Charlotte will get this if it happens. We won't go to Rock Hill because they'll not throw their hand into the ring for this. They just won't. Erik Spanberg is managing editor of the Charlotte Business Journal. Ryan Pitkin, co-founder and editor of Queen City Nerve, and Steve Harrison, our politics reporter here at WFAE News. Thank you all for the hour.
Charlotte Talks is a production of 90.7 WFAE. Support for Charlotte Talks comes from Mazda of South Charlotte.